when you're copying and pasting different parts, different selections of your image in order to sort of deal with those problem areas. That would be like another way that you can use edit mode and masking in conjunction. Whereas in develop mode, develop mode is quite different. So let's open up an image here and we'll start talking about masking. So whereas in edit mode, you have a masking that's predicated on a layer system. And so you're making changes to your image based on that. Whereas in develop mode, you're making changes to one image based on the sort of pixel values that you're seeing in the one image. And we'll talk about what that looks like. So just to clarify, I think just some terminology to start. Let's hide this. Masking is highlighting, in effect, parts of your image through some form of effect, right? So when you mask a part of your image, it means you're drawing attention to it. Masking can change lighting conditions. It can change color. It can, like I said, in the terms of edit mode, it can fill it with new content. You can do a lot of things when you mask, but ultimately what you're doing is you're making some form of isolated selection as to where you want effects to occur. Okay. So when you open up develop mode, one of the things that should become quite apparent is that develop mode has all these filters on the left, like a ton of different filters and sub filters within those. For example, if I was to open up the general tab itself, general has general lighting adjustments to your image. And I think what should be noted about general and white balance and light EQ and color EQ and color wheel, etc., all the way down the line, is that they make an application to the whole image. So in terms of, they're not really masking the image per se, they're changing the whole image. I mean, in this case, they're still doing a masking operation. It's just that they're not being selective about it. They're making an adjustment to the whole image. Versus masking that we do either using artificial intelligence or we do by hand, right? These are masking modes that we would do. So when I'm making a general exposure adjustment, let's say I just darken the contrast let's darken the contrast and the exposure in my image. You can see that that is universally applied, right? Versus making a selection to my image using the masking tools and sort of making adjustments like exposure and contrast to those. So just a quick note, maybe I suppose this was brought up in a previous workshop, and I was surprised to see how many people didn't know this. One of the users in the workshop mentioned that I do this all the time, but I often right click on sliders. And when you right click on sliders, it returns it to its original value. So it's just kind of like a quick tip there. So even if you've moved things around, you can just quickly right click on them to return them back to their stated values. So we recently did a bit of an overhaul in the last couple versions of ACDSee where we have masking now having its dedicated location in develop mode at the top of develop mode. And this is kind of important because masking tools don't actually use any of the tool functionalities, the filters of these following fields. So things like general all the way down to post crop vignette, they won't actually have an effect on the masking that you're doing. Masking comes with its own set of tools and operations. So when we're making adjustments, we're making masking in edit mode. We're going to have sort of two sort of areas that we're concerned with. We have the AI functions, so AI subject, AI background, and AI sky. And then what I like to call is the manual or like user controlled variables like brush, linear gradient, and radial gradient. So these are the two broad sections of masking functionalities. And then when we have a active selection, right? And in this case, selections are represented by an overlay, which we'll see momentarily. We can then make adjustments to the area of our image that we see that overlay has an effect on. So just to step back for a moment here. Um, I'm just going to go into edit mode. Actually, here's a good question before I begin. How many people are familiar with masking in edit mode? I mean, I cover it a ton in workshops, but I just want to get a simple yes or no. Are you familiar with it? Yes, no, maybe, or somewhat, Yeah. And so, like, masking in edit mode is far more complicated and has more elements because it involves multiple layers. Um, but I just want to sort of show or illustrate something really quickly. This is useful. It seems like some people obviously have some familiarity with it, and some others have like intermediate or just beginning understandings of it. But I just want to make a quick comparison and between edit mode and develop mode. So when we're in develop mode, what we're gonna do to mask an image, let's just treat our image like um let's make a change to our image here, and we'll try to make the same change in edit mode just so you can illustrate the differences. So in this image, I have a eagle, right? And it's fairly clearly the subject of our image, with the sky being the background in our image. Why don't we just make some lighting adjustments to the eagle itself, and we'll talk about how that lighting adjustment may differ in edit mode, or sort of making subject selections in edit mode may differ. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on AI subject here, and I'm confident that the software will do a very good job of making the selection for me, so I don't have to make it manually. But there's my selection of my eagle here. Now, when I go to make adjustments, right, to this image, the adjustments that I'm going to be making are going to be to the area that I have selected. So the area that I have selected is masked, and it is this red portion here. When you have a mask, right, you can show the mask by clicking on this little icon here. And what that does is it toggles the preview off, where you can change the color of your preview if you prefer. So you get an understanding of what is being selected in your image. Now, what is being selected is different from what I'm going to do to what is being selected. So a selection alone means nothing without some corresponding adjustments, right? Just because I've selected something doesn't mean that I've instructed ACDSee to make any changes. And this is important. So this section of tools corresponds to what selections may look like, right? What I can do to those selections. So right now, when I opened it up, I opened up the color EQ tab, which comes with a variety of different functions related to color. I think right now I'm in saturation. So I can saturate my image based on all these different color ranges. I could change the brightness, for example, of my selection. I could change the hue, and I can change the contrast. Vice versa, I could go up to the general tab, right? And like I said earlier, masking has its own sort of general functions like exposure and saturation and vibrance and contrast and clarity, etc. Versus something like tone curves, which allows me to create a tone curve over a selection. To illustrate this, what we're going to do is we're actually going to we'll make a change from every tab just to sort of see what it does to our image here. But sort of in order to illustrate this, what I might do is, for the time being, now that we know that the mask is our eagle here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn the mask off, and we'll show, or rather I'll hide the mask, not turn it off. So in the general tab with my mask or my selection active, let's I don't know, let's increase the clarity on my image to make sort of variations in pixels really pop. No, we won't adjust that. We'll adjust temperature. So we'll warm our eagle slightly, and then maybe we'll pull the exposure down slightly. So within the general tab, I have a reduced exposure, increased temperature or warmth, and increased clarity. Now, if I click over to color EQ, I'm still operating on the same mask. So this mask is treated as one object. And now I can do something like increase the saturation. For example, I could increase the saturations. Let's see if orange will have any effect. Yeah. So I've increased the saturation of the orange in my image here. I could go over to something like hue, and maybe I could pull the oranges further into reds. So you can see that effect there. Or I could pull it further into yellow. Let's see if I don't have much red in this image. I do have a bit of yellow. Let's just pull it slightly into the red hue here. So in terms of a color EQ adjustment, now I have a saturation adjustment right here and a hue adjustment right here. So just quickly, just before so I'm not confusing anyone. So there's three sets of tools here, general, color EQ, and tone curves. And within those tools, they have all these subtools. So general has all these tools right here. Color EQ has all these different modes. So saturation increases or decreases the saturation in your image. Brightness increases the, I guess, white or black values of any given pixel. Hue shifts the color range from one color to its sort of neighboring colors. And then contrast increases the contrast for particular color ranges in your image. And then finally, we have tone curves. And tone curves allows us to just create a curve on our image. So that adjusts the lighting. I think we'll just pull the blacks into the, there we go. So you've just created a very subtle tone curve on my image. So we have our before and we have our after adjustments on this image. They don't look great, but what they do illustrate right now is that I have active adjustments on my image. So when it comes to masking, what do I have here? Well, I have an AI mask. So I created it instantaneously, predicated on the subject matter in my image. Subject matter in my image being clearly identifiable, and it's an eagle. So AI was able to go, oh, here's the contours of this mask. It selected it for me, and it allowed me to adjust the three values that we see here: general, color EQ, and tone curves. And we can engage with the corresponding and respective sub sort of tools in regards to those sets. Okay, let's talk about like what masking looks like very briefly in edit mode to sort of get an understanding. And hopefully what this is going to illustrate to you is it's going to illustrate that the masking that we do in develop mode is very powerful, but it is quite a bit more simple and easy to grasp from a standpoint of editing, masking in edit mode. So I'll just navigate away from this image. I'm going to go into my bird folder, and I'm actually just going to find the same image itself. And so we can look at masking in this mode as well. So here's that same image, it's just a different version of it, unedited in this case. Doc asked, how do I change the preview color? Doc, when we jump back into develop mode, I'll show you how to change the masking color, which is what you mean. Yeah, absolutely. I can show you that. In edit mode, to change the preview color, you would go to select overlay options, and it gives you the ability to change that color within edit mode. I want to be clear, Doc, this is not develop mode. I will show you that again when we jump back in develop mode. But if you want to change it in edit mode, you do go select and overlay options. Okay, so let's take a look at like what masking looks like in edit mode, which is a bit different. Same operation, select subject. I'm going to select the subject in my image. It creates a mask. When Doc mentioned in his question what the preview color is, he meant this. So this is a selection overlay or mask overlay, and it represents, it's sort of represented in this bright red color, just to sort of stand out and to illustrate that, hey, you're selecting this eagle in particular. So masking could be, okay, what it could be is I could change the vibrance, right? I could go in and change the vibrance. Let's make our eagle more vibrant, just for the time being. However, the problem, or at least the limitation of edit mode is that this vibrancy adjustment is one adjustment versus the develop mode adjustments. They could be simultaneously saturation and hue and brightness and contrast and what's the word for it? Tone curves at the same time. However, so there's a limitation in terms of what adjustment layers that we can apply to this. In this case, I'm just applying a vibrance is a one-step process. However, the benefit or difference of edit mode is I can make a mask like this, a selection of my subject matter, and I can mask my subject matter, in this case, my eagle, into a whole nother background. So if I was to place this background, for example, it's just doesn't matter. It's just an example. But there's my background, my new background. So this is obviously something that develop mode can't do, right? It cannot implant a new layer into your layer hierarchy. So what you gain in develop mode in terms of like all these parametric simultaneous editing functions, like being able to edit contrast and brightness and hue and all of those things at the same time, you lose the ability to make hierarchical layer adjustments, like adding new backgrounds into your image. So people often ask me, they say, Adam, these tools seem really similar. How are they different? Hopefully what I'm showing you here, and again, this is really meant to be preliminary. I'm not going into too much depth on the masking functionality in edit mode. That's not the subject of matter of today's conversation. But what this should illustrate to you is, hey, these are fundamentally different tools in different modes in the software, and they offer different things, right? So just to reiterate, develop mode comes with more controls, but it doesn't allow you to implant new sort of background content or add new layers into your image. And I refer to layers just in this case as images. Okay, let's discard this and jump back into develop mode and talk more about, we'll talk more about masking controls. Where did I put my selections folder? There it is. The other thing that's valid and really important to know about develop mode and masking in develop mode is that because develop mode is fully non-destructive, when I navigate back into this eagle file that I have here, after having navigated to into edit mode and doing different things, right? You'll see that the criteria of adjustments that I have within the masking folder is remembered. So what does that mean? Well, under the general tab, my exposure adjustment is remembered, my temperature is remembered, my clarity adjustment is remembered, my color EQ adjustments are remembered, and finally my tone curve is still present. So even after I've navigated away and I've been doing new things and I come back to this, a month or 2 months later, I still have these active development adjustments that I can tweak, right? So I can go, oh, I actually think it should be right here. Well, then if that's the case, then this is editable to me at any point, right? During my sort of sessions in regards to ACDSee. Okay, let's have a look at some of the other masking, broad masking variations. And then we will talk about particularities in regards to masking. So what I'm going to show you is the difference between AI masking and manual masking. And then we'll talk about the actual masking controls in a bit more depth. So I just clicked this big, looks like a recycle icon. And what that does is it just returns the image back to its original conditions. And so when I click that, it applies to every single adjustment in my image. So that just resets my image in this case. So we showcased AI subject. How is that different from AI background? Well, if I click on AI background, you'll see the exact inverse will be selected in my image. Now, Doc asked earlier, he asked, how do I change the preview? Well, when after I've clicked on a mask function, like in this case, the subject, or sorry, the background mask, my masking tools will pop up. And the one that will be present on all the tools is the ability to change the mask color. So I'm just going to change my mask color to red. And there you have it. My mask is now red and showcases the background in my image here. So what is highlighted, what is masked, or what is selected in my image, and I'm using those terms kind of simultaneously, is indicated by our red overlay. So, Doc, does that answer your question? You already said it. Okay, great. Well, thanks for the question. It was a good question. So I have made a selection of my background here. And once again, we must understand that no adjustments have taken place to this yet. We simply need to make some adjustments now for that to come into effect. So for the background here, why don't we change the blue to like a cyan color just to do a hue change? So I'll pull this. Oops. We'll just turn off the mask so we can see the adjustments. So I could change the sky color from this sort of deep blue to a little bit more of a cyan color, or I could pull it more into the purple spectrum if I wanted to. I could also, I could also pull the brightness down so I can make it darker. And if I wanted to, I can increase the saturation in that color there as well. So I can make it more of a deep, almost leaning on purple blue there. So just so you can see the difference in variation between that. What you will notice is that our eagle, from a pixel perspective, from a content perspective, remains unchanged. And so this brings me back to my initial point. And really, when I'm talking about masking, I'm talking about selective adjustments, right? So these adjustments are being applied to our background or our sky, I guess, in this image, whereas our subject remains completely unchanged. So does that make sense overall that, these different, we can focus on different points of selection in these tools? And then in this case, we've chosen to select the background rather than the subject matter. So these two things are different. I'm just gonna take a sip of my coffee here. So that background adjustment is different from our subject adjustment. Now, let's do the same interaction with a new image, and we'll talk about AI sky. So what this would be doing, just so we're aware, is it would be making a selection of our sky in our image. So it'd be looking for a sky in our image. Now, if I click on AI sky here on this image, what it's going to do is it's just going to produce the same as the AI background, right? Like it's going to select the background in my image because it represents, I don't know, like a blue part of our image. Yeah. So, not a really fancy adjustment in this image. However, if we were to go to our other image here where a sky is clearly present, we can make a selection of this sky using the AI sky tool in a way that the AI background probably would struggle with, because the AI background is looking for something that is in focus and something that is not in focus. So in our eagle example, the eagle had multiple details to it. It's a central feature of the center of my image here. It's clearly what is in focus in the image versus the background, in this case, on the eagle, the sky image. Well, that was out of focus and it was kind of homogeneous in terms of its appearance. So the AI would look at that and go, that's not the subject, it's the background. Versus this image, well, the AI function is going to be looking for skies, and let's see how it does. So I'll click on the AI sky function and it will produce, yeah, so it sees the sky. The nice thing about this image too is that it also references the water because it can tell that there is a reflection of the sky in the water. And that's important because if we're making adjustments to one, right, if we're changing the color values of the sky, well, if the color values are reflected in the sky, it will also be reflected in the water. So that brings us to a new point. Let's say we want the sky in this, but we didn't want the water. How would we go about addressing that issue? Because if right now, what if I was to do was say I like what I see here. Let's say I want to, I don't know, increase the contrast and clarity. And let's say I also want to, I want to make this blue, I really want to brighten it up. And I want to pull, I don't know, this, let's say I want to pull blue more into the cyan spectrum there. And so I get this really like beautiful, bright, high contrast with the pillowy clouds here. And also I've moved it more into the green spectrum. But let's say I didn't want to apply adjustment to the water itself. So how would I do that? Well, this is sort of where we're going to start to engage with the concept of a manual adjustment. Manual adjustments can be fully manual, meaning that you can start the process with your very own brush strokes. But we can also make AI adjustments like subject, background, and sky, and then decide to pull away items in our selection using the brush itself. So what I could do is I could use my brush. You can see me increasing and decreasing my nib width here. What I could do is I could simply brush on, right, or off a part of my image. So I'm right clicking right now to remove, and I'm left clicking to add. But if I wanted to brush on this area here, then what it would do is that it would remove this part of my image from the effect being applied. So now what you should see is, let's make this more egregious. So you can see that the effects that are being applied to the sky here are no longer being applied to the water itself. Can everybody see that? The distinction between that we've created? What we did here was we removed a mask from the bottom portion of our image while maintaining the mask on the top portion of our image. So masks are not static. You can interact with them. You can change them, right? There's a lot of functionality in regards to that. When we talk in a moment here about manual adjustments, we'll talk about all the tools that correspond with those manual adjustments. But know that you can make an AI adjustment like this subject selection on our eagle there, or our selection to this sky here, and amend it with the manual tools by using the brush controls. The brush controls are listed right here. So these are they correspond to any mask that you make, right? Even if you're making a radial gradient or sorry, rather the 3 AI ones, or the brush controls themselves, they will allow you to adjust these values. Okay, so we got some questions, so I'll answer them. Anonymous asked, is there a way to change the sensitivity for AI selection? E.g., some trees are not being selected while doing AI subject. Yeah. So no. Now what we can't adjust, or less the AI functions right now are like static in terms of their algorithm. So how they deem something a sky or a subject in our image. Those are fixed values that are sort of in the back end and unchangeable to you, the user. However, what I'm sort of hopefully illustrating to you is just because you've made an AI selection doesn't mean that it can't be adjusted. AI selections are not perfect and often will require you to fix them. I'll give you an example of that. And we will get to the inversions as well when we talk a little bit more about the tools. But just to sate your curiosity right now, Anonymous, when you have an active mask, right, you can always click on the invert the currently selected mask button down right here. And so what this will do is it will take a existing mask, in this case, the mask you've created of the sky, and it will invert it. So what it will do is it will no longer be considering the sky, and it will be considering everything else in your image. And when you click this, what will happen is your mask, your show mask, your display mask here will change. So when I click that, the sky is treated as unselected or unmasked, and the body of our image here is now treated as selected. Hopefully everybody can see that when I invert the mask. So inversions of masks is very powerful. It's powerful because sometimes it's easier to make a selection of something that you don't want selected in your image and then invert it than it is to make a direct selection of the thing you want to select in your image. So that being said, when we turn off the show mask here, we're seeing a image that is now affected by those adjustments. So when I increase the curves here or adjust the saturation and exposure in my image, those are changing. Okay, so we Anonymous asked a question that sort of pointed to a limitation, and I want to showcase what that looks like. So here we have an image of a gentleman sitting down, and when I go to select AI subject, you'll see that it does an okay job, but there's some missing pieces in this image that we have to address. So I'm going to showcase to you how to address this image issue and to add or finish the active selection here. So we have a red selection of our subject matter. There's some elements that are missing. In this case, the chair is missing from our selection, and the bottom right hand corner here of the chair, and also it looks like a bit of a shirt, is also missing from the selection. So the way we address this is we actually use the brush controls to brush on this part of our image so that we can add it to the selection, so we can make adjustments to our subject matter here. So if we have an incomplete selection, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to the brush controls. I don't know, we'll find a brush that's maybe more suited to the size of my subject matter here. Now, what we can do is I can just simply right click in this area to sort of add this part of my image to the selection. However, what you might find is that when you get close to the edge, it's harder to make a selection of the edge, because even if you're very careful, there will be overage on the selection. So what I typically do when I'm making refined selections like this is I'm going to use a tool called smart brushing. And smart brushing is a pixel aware method to make a selection of edges and sort of content predicated on brightness and color or hue similarities. So what that means to you is that when I go to select this area here, what it's seeing is it's going, oh, you know what? There's a similar cream color at a similar brightness as I navigate here, and I'm going to add it to the selection. And hopefully what that does is it makes it easier for me to navigate through difficult parts of this area. What I might do is I actually might increase the tolerance on this too, because I actually want to capture more of that. Yeah, there we go. More of that edge that I'm missing here. So what tolerance does in relation to the nib width and the smart brushing effect is tolerance will say a low tolerance will be more discriminatory of the pixels and their similarities, and a high tolerance will be less discriminatory of the pixels and their similarities. Meaning, if the cream isn't exactly the same cream, that will be captured in a high tolerance, versus a low tolerance is looking for the exact same cream color and at the same hue and lightness. So in this case, when I navigate through and I just brush on, in this case, the missing part of my image, I've then added that to my selection that are already created using the AI function. Now, why would I do this? Well, fundamentally, I would do this to save time, right? So manual selections are labor intensive and take time. So if you can use AI to begin your selection process, all the better, right? Because that way you're saving yourself time in the long run, and then you can just add on to that that selection in any ways that it may not fully, fit the bill, right? So I'm just going to go and I'm going to finish my selection down in the corner here. And once I've finished this selection, I'm going to turn off magic, because I don't need magic to select the interior of this area. I can just do that with the regular brush tool. So in this case, it doesn't need to be a discriminatory smart brushing effect here. So that's pretty good. It's a pretty decent selection. So with that selection in mind now, right, I can make corresponding adjustments to the selected subject matter. So again, I could adjust curves on my image to sort of brighten and darken and give him more contrast and sort of, highlight my subject matter here. And let's say, I don't know, I cool him slightly in this image or whatever. So I've made adjustments here that now fit with my image here. And so that adjustment is really powerful. And actually, from a color standpoint, that adjustment was quite good. It looks much better than the original. So, excuse me. So, what AI tools may lack in terms of their ability to make distinction between certain elements in your image, you can always use the brushing controls in conjunction with something like the smart brushing tool to capture uncaptured elements that were a part of that AI selection. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes or no? Is there any confusions in regards to that? What I'm doing here is I'm combining an AI selection method with a manual selection method. Okay. If people are with me, that's good. Maybe I'll take a moment to just take a little pause here. And does anyone have any questions in regards to anything they're seeing? Um, or any curiosities in regards to anything I've covered so far? So LJ asked, so use inverse for background. So I can do that two ways. Oh, actually, let's showcase it one way here right now, and then I'll talk about the other tools. So I can invert the selection. So when I do that, it's going to not apply to my subject matter, but it'll apply to the background. And here it is. So that's a contrast and cooling adjustment to the background, but not applied to the subject matter. And an inversion again. There we go. So Scott asked the other choices under smart brushing. Right. So pressure. So pressure is increases the bring it up. Pressure increases the effect of when you brush using your nib. So a low pressure will have a very subtle effect. You can see you can see that when I look at that nib selection, there's like it has like a what's the word for it? Lower opacity almost to it. So what is selected then is reduced versus a like a high pressure, which is going to when we go to apply this effect, it's going to oops, I'm using the feathering tool, not the pressure tool. It's going to be more intense. What this should illustrate to you is it's very similar to opacity. So low pressure will have a lower opacity of effect, and high pressure will have a higher opacity of effect. So when you go to make adjustments, it's going to feel like, hey, this looks like it's slightly faded with a low pressure versus a high pressure. It will just be a standard adjustment, right? Okay, so smart brushing we talked about, tolerance we talked about. I guess feathering, the last one is so when you click using your nib, there's the point of your nib that is considered within the first circle, so that it has a full application of effect. And then you have with a feathering adjustment, you have a gradient effect that is going to be applied outwards from that with full effect near the center circle to no effect to the outward of the circle. So nib allows you to control and feather your selections so that they are gradual or gentle on the edges. Jim asked, can you blur the background in this image? That's a good question. Probably. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it using masking though. Let's see. No, not using masking. Detail, perhaps. Let's see. Sharpening, noise reduction, skin tone, aberration. Detail. Yeah, I definitely want to say that's possible. Let's see. I'll do AI background really quickly here and see what happens. Sharpness. Ah, it would be just sharpness. Sorry about that. So I'm just thinking it through. Yeah. So if I was to go to, so there's 4 tabs in develop mode. I've been working in tune, which corresponds to the lighting and color adjustments. Detail corresponds to sort of like individual pixel adjustments. So typically sharpness, yeah, noise reduction, skin tune, and chromatic aberration. And there's geometry, which changes the shape of your image and repair. So within detail, I've basically made a mask of my background here, and then instead of increasing the sharpness of my image, I actually reduce the sharpness, which functionally blurs my image. To answer your question, let's go. Here we go. I want to undo that. There we go. So, what have we covered there? Okay, so we've covered a little bit of manual brushing tools. I just want to showcase that sort of from the get-go as well. So let's open up a different image here. I can also start without using AI subject, background, or sky. I can just start out with a general brush adjustment. And so that leaves it completely manual from the start for me to make a selection, in this case, of my subject matter or what have you. So this was in our first edition, the first versions of develop mode contained a brush, adjustments in my image here. And so obviously in order to make a proper selection of my subject matter, I would want to be using something like smart brushing. But I just want to illustrate that, that adjustment process is possible using just the brush tools itself. Likewise, if I was to go to linear gradient, for example, linear gradient is considered a manual adjustment, but it doesn't work the way that the brush tool does. It treats a section of my image here as a sort of gradient from full effect to zero effect. And then it gives me the ability to make lighting adjustments to a grouped section of my image here. So let's say I wanted the effect to apply to this foliage in the top of my image here. I could set this gradient effect, okay? And then what I can do is I can increase, I don't know, the saturation, and I could, add a nice tone curve or something like that to my image here. And then that changes the original to the effect in my image here. Note that when I'm using a linear gradient, that this effect will have a zero application in the part of the mask where the mask doesn't show. So what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing a full application at the top of my image, and then it slowly, gradually doesn't change at the bottom here. And so you can see that that's reflected in my image, and I can see it best on the actual bridge here, knowing that there's no effect down in this bottom area versus there's effect up at the top there. Hopefully everybody can see that, but that's the linear gradient tool versus something like the radial gradient tool, which, as you can see, creates a circle on my image where the effect is going to be either on the inside or outside of my radial gradient. So again, I can go through and I can let's see here. I can make a contrast adjustment. What did I change? Did I just warm it the other time? Yeah, I think I just made it warmer, and I did a tone curves adjustment. So where that looks like something like this, where it has an effect in the center here, but nowhere else. So that's a radial gradient. Vice versa, I can also invert that gradient, and then that effect will be applied to the rest of my image. Let's see if I can get that to come through. Yeah. Not on the center of my image. So we understand that you can make AI selections and you can adjust as you see fit, background in AI sky. We talked about using these AI functions while adding brush strokes to them to sort of amend and adjust them. And then just very quickly, I just showed you linear gradient and radial gradients just because they're fairly simple to understand. The one other thing I would mention about our linear gradient tool that I didn't cover is that you can make a linear gradient to your image. Let's say we're increasing the saturation and the temperature. The one thing I can do is if I like my radial gradient, the effect that it's been applied up here, but I would like to add it maybe in this left-hand corner here or the right-hand corner while leaving the bridge effect the same. What I can do is I can actually right click on my mask that I've created, in this case, a linear gradient mask, and I can convert it to a brush mask. And when I do that, it gives me the tools back to brush on other parts of my image. So I can convert radial gradients, in this case, to brush gradients. Alan asked, so selecting a pixel is more than on-off. If we select a pixel with 50% pressure, it's on with differences, maybe 225. Not quite. Let me showcase what I mean. Let's see if I can find an image that's really going to represent this well. I'm just going to do a quick brush of maybe this top wing portion here. With pressure set to maximum. And let's set pressure really, really low in this section right here. So Alan, when I go to make adjustments to this image here, the exposure will be changed differently in correspondence with the amount of pressure set on that image or that part of my image. So the area that I have a maximum pressure application, you can see is darker, right? Closer to 0 or whatever, versus the parts of my image that have a lower pressure application will see a much, much, much reduced effect. So what this is akin to is it's akin to an opacity slider where I say, oh, I've got an effect. I'm applying the effect in the area, but I'm going to reduce the overall opacity of the effect. Meaning that if I was to move the opacity to 50%, or in this case, the pressure to 5%, right? Then 5% of the pixels are being affected by the corresponding adjustment, or, rather than 100% of the pixels being affected by the corresponding adjustment. Does that make sense, Alan? Hopefully that does. But yeah, pressure has an application adjustment predicated on sort of a degree of severity in your image there. Okay, so there's some other tools that I kind of want to communicate here. So let's communicate them. I'm going to select my subject again using the AI subject selection. And let's just make a saturation and a tone curves adjustment. So what I've talked about is I've talked about the general tool. I've talked about color EQ. I've talked about tone curves. Somebody had some wanted to know more about the detail tab. So we know that we can mask using the detail tab as well. There's just far fewer tools in here for what we're talking about. So we've talked about masking. We've talked about AI masking and the differences between AI masking and manual masking. We've also talked about all these brush controls in regards to this tool, but we haven't talked about these tools down here. And I do want to mention these before we close off the workshop for today. So you may be wondering if I can only apply one selection at a time. And so the answer to that is actually there can be multiple masks present in one image. So in my image here, I have one mask, right? And that mask is represented by this little mask icon here. And this represents the mask that was applied to my eagle. So my saturation, let's just dramatically increase that so everybody can see. So a saturation adjustment and a tone curves adjustment. If I wanted to make a corresponding selection to the background in my image, so the sky in my image, what I can do is I could click on the plus button here and select the background, Or what I could do is I could duplicate a selected mask, right? And then just invert it and apply a corresponding adjustment. So let's say, I don't know, let's cool off our image here. Oops. And we'll move the blue into, let's say, into the purple range. So what you can see here is that I have the mask for the background and a mask for the eagle. So I can go in and I can add new masks, a subject, select new parts of my image. The other thing I can do is I can add a non-subject selection mask. So if I click on this, you'll see that I can select AI subject, I can select background, I can select sky, but I could also go in and just add like a linear gradient if I wanted to. So I could have a linear gradient where the exposure is reduced at the top of my image here, in conjunction with the other masks that I have. Obviously, I can remove masks. So if I didn't like my linear mask, I could delete it. I could copy a currently selected mask, right? And paste it to a new one, which is what that button does right there. You've already seen me duplicate a mask. I did it with this one right there. And then I just inverted the mask with the corresponding button right next to it. The other thing is I can disable a mask. So if I disable this, that effect will be sort of temporarily removed in my image, or I can preview it by clicking that as well. And then lastly, but not least, we have the pixel targeting mask. So I can click on a pixel targeting tool. And this is sort of extra content that maybe I probably won't go in today because it'll just push the workshop into too much depth. But for whatever corresponding mask I may have, I can select a certain degree of luminance, so brightness, and a certain degree of color range to have that effect applied in more depth. Pixel targeting is very powerful. It's definitely supplementary to what we've talked about today, and I'll maybe talk about it more in another workshop because it sort of goes on a bit into too much depth today for something that really represents a bit of an introductory workshop in regards to masking. So what did we talk about today? So we basically looked at what masking is, and then we compared what masking is in relation to something like edit mode and how it handles masking very differently. We talked about AI masking versus manual masking. So masking by hand with the brush tool versus masking by using an AI function. We talked about the masking's corresponding controls. So the three main controls in the Tune tab being general, color EQ, and tone curves. And then we also talked about, the different functions that you can do with multiple masks down here at the bottom. The other thing we talked about is just the other tab that contains masking functionality, which is the detail tab. We talked about masking multiple times simultaneously using either the plus to add a new mask or using the duplicate mask button. And then sort of we talked about the various masking tools and sort of how to get the best out of images that contain partially masked processes through the AI function, which we can then fix using the brush tool. That kind of covers everything I wanted to talk about today in this workshop on develop masking. Do you have any other more questions before I close off today? Thank you so much for participating, everyone. I really appreciate it. Hopefully this illuminates a lot of the masking functionality of develop mode for you, and also shows you the ways in which develop mode masks differently and better from edit mode, in how it sort of what its strengths are and what edit mode strengths are in terms of masking. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Graham. John asked, going back to your earlier discussion about the difference with masking and develop and edit mode, what happens on either mode when you save your photo? Do they both save with sidecar files? No. That's a really good question, John. So develop mode is fully non-destructive, which means that all of the adjustments will be saved in those sidecar files that are made when you adjust an image in develop mode. In edit mode, you have to intentionally save your file as an ACDSee file when you go to save your file for the first time. ACDSee files are proprietary and will contain every layer and layer adjustment that you've made in correspondence with the masking that you have. So both are non-destructive, both will contain your adjustments and will be referenceable in the future. Develop mode does it automatically. Edit mode, you have to save the it as an ACDSee file when you go to save. Does that answer your question? Hopefully it does, John.